The bee never stood a chance. It lifted off a spray of white clover, drifted lazily toward the girl walking the orchard path with a honey pail in each hand, and a black wolf the size of a pony rose out of the tall grass and snapped it clean out of the air. What the girl did not know, what she could not possibly know, was that the enormous, ridiculous animal, spitting out bee wings at her feet, was Alaric Thorn, Alpha King of the Northern Reach, the most feared wolf on the continent, a male who had ended a border war with a single look. And at this particular moment, the most feared wolf on the continent was staring down a second bee with murder in his golden eyes, because the second bee was hovering near her wrist. I should be in the war council, Alaric thought, as his wolf lowered its head and growled at an insect. I should be reviewing grain tariffs. I am guarding a beekeeper from her own bees. The bee landed on the rim of her pail. The wolf lunged. The pail went flying. The girl went sideways into the clover with a yelp, and 2 gallons of lavender honey painted a golden stripe across the orchard grass. "Honey!" she shouted. "Bad wolf! Bad, terrible wolf!" She had named him Honey. That was the other thing. 3 weeks ago, the Alpha King of the Northern Reach had been named Honey by a barefoot omega with clover stems in her hair, and he had allowed it, and his wolf, the traitor, had wagged its tail. The Hive started it, Alaric told himself, sitting in the wreckage of her morning's work, with honey dripping off his muzzle. That bee was approaching my mate with intent. This was a defensive action. Her name was Wren Hollis, and she was, by every law and ledger of the Northern Reach, nobody. She kept 11 hives at the edge of the Black Pine Territory, in a cottage with a roof that leaked over the kitchen and nowhere else, as if even the rain had decided she deserved one dry room. She sold medicinal honey to the village apothecary, lavender honey for burns, dark buckwheat honey for coughs, and a thin pale honey she fed with a spoon to orphaned fox kits and one-eyed barn cats, and once a hawk with a splintered wing that had hated everyone in the world except her. Her own pack had not banished her. That would have required them to notice her. When her parents died of the river fever, her aunt's family simply stopped setting a place for her. Her cousin Della wrote to her twice the first winter, once the second winter, and then never again, though Wren still checked the post-rider's bag every week, and still said, "Nothing today, then, that's fine," in a bright voice the post-rider had stopped believing years ago. On pack-gathering nights, she could see the bonfire from her hill. Nobody had ever told her not to come. Nobody had ever asked why she didn't. So when a giant black wolf had staggered out of the tree line 3 weeks ago, ribs heaving, a crossbow bolt through the meat of his shoulder, she had not screamed, and she had not run. She had looked at the largest predator she had ever seen in her life, said, "Oh, you poor, enormous thing," and gone to get her honey and her needle. Here is what had actually happened, though Wren would not learn it for a long time. The Alpha King had been ambushed on a solo border run by rogues who would very shortly regret being born. He had killed 4 of them, taken a bolt meant for his spine, and dragged himself toward the nearest scent of safety. And the nearest scent of safety, the scent his half-dead wolf chose over his own war camp 2 miles east, was lavender and beeswax and wood smoke, coming from a leaning cottage on a hill. He had planned to rest an hour and vanish before dawn. Instead, he had woken at midnight to a small omega kneeling over him with a lantern, packing his wound with honey, and talking to him the entire time in a low, steady voice, the way you talk to something you refuse to let die. This will sting, and you can bite me if you have to, she had said, but I'd rather you didn't, because I need both hands for the jars. He could have healed the wound himself in an hour by shifting. Instead, the Alpha King of the Northern Reach lay very still on a beekeeper's floor and let her stitch him with waxed thread, because her hands were warm and she smelled like every good thing he had never been allowed, and his wolf had gone quiet in a way it had not been quiet in 19 years. Halfway through, she had leaned her forehead briefly against his ruff, exhausted, and whispered, "Please stay alive. I really need one thing this year to stay alive." And something in Alaric's chest had come off its hinges and never gone back on. "Mate," his wolf said, simple as sunrise. "No," said Alaric. "Mate," said the wolf, and rested its head in her lap. And that was the end of the argument, though Alaric would keep having it out loud for another month. He left before dawn, as planned. He made it exactly 200 yards, as not planned, before turning around, lying down in her bee yard, and waiting for her to wake up and find him. When she came out with her smoker and her veil and saw him sprawled between the hives like a fallen thundercloud, she put her hands on her hips. "You're still here. I am aware," thought Alaric. "Well," she said, "I suppose you'll want breakfast." He stayed for breakfast. He had now stayed for 22 breakfasts. In the capital, his beta was covering for his daily disappearances with increasingly desperate lies. In the orchard, the king was licking spilled lavender honey off his own paws, while Wren scraped what she could salvage back into the pail and lectured him about the economics of beekeeping. "That was 2 silver marks of honey. She pointed at the ruined grass. "The bees are not attacking me. The bees are my employees. You have now eaten 3 of my employees this week." The hive, Alaric thought with great dignity, honey in his whiskers, remains a threat I am not prepared to dismiss. He had planned to stay 1 night. He had been wrong about that, and he was about to be wrong about a great many other things. The thefts began in the 2nd week, and they escalated, because everything about the wolf escalated. First it was her shawl, grey wool, mended at one corner with mismatched blue thread, hung on the garden fence to air. Wren searched for it for 2 days. The shawl was, at that moment, in the royal palace of the Northern Reach, buried in the Alpha King's bed. And every night the most powerful male on the continent pressed his face into it like a drowning man. And every morning he told himself this was a strategic assessment of an unknown scent signature. And every morning he believed himself a little less. Then came the gifts. Wren opened her door one dawn to find a dead rabbit on her step, arranged with what could only be called ceremony. The wolf sat behind it, chest out, tail sweeping the frost, radiating the tremendous pride of a hunter, providing for his own. "Oh," said Wren, who had been a vegetable and honey eater for most of a lean decade and did not have the heart to say so. "For me? You shouldn't have. I am an excellent provider," thought the king of 11 provinces. Note the size of the rabbit. Note it. She made rabbit stew and gave him most of it, and he watched her eat her small portion with such intensity that she laughed and asked if he'd never seen a girl eat soup. He had, in fact, dined with empresses. None of them had ever tucked 1 foot under themselves on a kitchen bench and blown on a spoon and made his entire chest ache. The 3rd escalation was the bath. It was raining, the kind of cold spring rain that gets into bones, and the wolf came back from the tree line soaked black and muddy to the elbows, and Wren made an executive decision. She heated water in every pot she owned, filled the big cedar washtub by the fire, and pointed. In. Absolutely not, thought Alaric. In or you sleep in the shed. The Alpha King of the Northern Reach got in the tub. His knees did not fit. His dignity did not fit. She rolled her sleeves to the shoulder and scrubbed lavender soap into his ruff with both hands, humming, her fingers working down to the skin. And Alaric Thorne, who had sat a throne through 2 assassination attempts without his pulse rising, stared fixedly at the wall and conducted the most intense internal negotiation of his life. This is a medical necessity, he informed his wolf. Mud carries disease. She is touching us, said the wolf, boneless with joy, one hind leg beginning to thump against the tub. Stop that. Stop the leg. You are a king. The leg did not stop. Water went everywhere. Wren laughed so hard, she had to sit down on the floor, and the sound of it did more damage to Alaric's composure than the crossbow bolt had done to his shoulder. The 4th escalation, inevitably, was the bed. He had rules about the bed. He had made them himself. The wolf slept by the hearth. That was the arrangement. That was proper. Then came a night of true frost, late for the season, and he heard her shivering through the wall of blankets that was not thick enough, and the rules lasted 11 more minutes. She woke at midnight to find a furnace of black fur curled the length of her back, one heavy paw over her hip, and she was so warm and so tired that she just said, "One night, mister. This is not a habit," and went back to sleep with her fingers in his fur. It was a habit by the end of the week. Meanwhile, in the capital, the situation was deteriorating. Beta Cassian, a lean, tired man who had known Alaric since they were boys, stood in the royal study for the 4th morning in a row, looking at an empty chair and a window that had clearly been exited through. When the king finally returned that evening, smelling of lavender and, inexplicably, of soap, Cassian folded his arms. "The council is asking where you go. Border patrols. Alone every day, for a month. I am very thorough. You have wool caught in your teeth, Alaric." A pause. The Alpha King of the Northern Reach lifted his chin with the full weight of his ancestors behind him and said, "That is a matter of national security." "There's also," Cassian continued, in the flat voice of a man cataloguing a slow-motion catastrophe, "the matter of your hand." Alaric's right hand was swollen across the knuckles in 3 places. Bee stings taken in wolf form carried over. He put the hand behind his back. "Training injury. You were stung, my king. Repeatedly. The healer says the pattern suggests you attacked a hive." "The hive," said Alaric, with the deep calm of a male who has fully lost his mind and made peace with it, made the first move. Cassian looked at his king, his brother in every way, but blood, the coldest strategist of their generation, and saw that he was gone, absolutely gone, wandered off into some lavender-scented country from which he had no intention of returning. Cassian pinched the bridge of his nose. "The council has set a date for the lunar selection. Lady Maren of High Cairn arrives in 10 days. Whatever this is, finish it before then." Alaric said nothing. But that night, the shawl came out from under the pillow again, and he lay in a bed that could sleep 6, and had never felt small until now, and thought about a leaking roof, and a girl who talked to bees, and how exactly a king tells someone that he is the dog. The near miss happened on a market day, and it nearly stopped his heart. Wren had walked to the village with her honey cart, and Alaric, being a rational head of state, had followed her the entire way through the tree line like a large black rumour. In the square, a royal patrol was posted, 6 soldiers in the grey of his own guard. And one of them, a sharp-eyed sergeant, looked at the tree line, went pale, and started walking toward the brush where an enormous and instantly recognizable black wolf was crouched behind a hazel shrub that concealed approximately 1/3 of him. The sergeant stopped 3 feet away, stared, opened his mouth. The Alpha King of the Northern Reach looked his own soldier dead in the eye and gave a single, slow shake of the head. The sergeant closed his mouth, executed a crisp about-face, marched back to his post, stared at the middle distance, and told no one anything for the rest of his natural life. He was promoted, mysteriously, the following month, and Alaric, heart still hammering, watched Wren sell honey across the square, watched her give a free jar to a woman with a coughing child, and pretend to mark it in her ledger so the woman wouldn't feel like charity, and understood that the danger was no longer discovery. The danger was that he could no longer imagine the shape of a day that did not have her in it. The change came, as changes do, on an ordinary evening, over an ordinary fire, with her fingers buried in his ruff. Wren had settled off the floor against his side, the way she did now, his heartbeat slow and enormous under her ear. Outside, the hives were quieting into their nighttime hum, and she began to talk, the way she only talked to him, because a wolf keeps every secret. "I got a letter today," she said. "Well, not for me. The post rider had one for the Hollis family, and for a second I thought." She stopped, started again. "It was for my aunt. Wedding invitation. Della's getting married." Her fingers kept moving in his fur, slow and even. "I taught Della to swim, you know. In the river, the summer before the fever. She used to hold on to my braid and scream and laugh." A log settled in the fire. "I'm not sad they don't hate me. I could work with hate. Hate means you're still on the list somewhere." She pressed her face into his shoulder, and her voice went so quiet that only a wolf could have heard it. "They just closed the door without slamming it. I heard the bees before I ever let myself cry about it. Isn't that stupid? 11 hives all humming at once sounds a little like a full house." Alaric lay absolutely still, her tears small and hot in his fur, and inside the wolf's chest a king was quietly being taken apart. "They will know your name," he thought, with a certainty that rearranged his whole future in a single beat. "Every wolf on this continent will know your name. You will never again check an empty post bag. I swear it on my crown, and if my crown objects, I will melt it down for your hives." She fell asleep against him. He watched the fire die, and did not move his paw from over her feet. Because her feet got cold, he knew that about her now. He knew 100 things like that, and he wanted to know 10,000 more. The rival arrived on a Tuesday, and he came in a green wagon with brass fittings, and his name was Tobias Fenn. I was a traveling apothecary buyer, human-side merchant, all easy smiles and clean fingernails, and he wanted Wren's entire lavender honey stock for the southern markets. He also, very obviously, wanted Wren. He complimented her ledger-keeping. He fixed the leaning gate post without being asked. He said, on the 3rd visit, "You know, a woman with your skills could run a proper shop in the South. I could set you up, no strings," and laughed a warm laugh, and there were absolutely strings. Anyone could see the strings. The strings were visible from the tree line. Specifically, they were visible from the tree line to a black wolf whose low, continuous growl was making the ground vibrate. He touched the gate, thought Alaric. That is her gate. He repaired her gate. Repair is courtship. I have repaired nothing. I have eaten her employees and stolen her shawl. When Tobias reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind Wren's ear. Familiar as you please. The wolf came out of the tree line like weather. He did not attack. He simply arrived, all of him, and inserted his entire massive body between Wren and the merchant, and sat down on Tobias's boot with the density of a collapsed star, and looked up at the man with an expression that had ended wars. That, said Tobias, very still, is a wolf. That's Honey, said Wren. He's friendly. Honey peeled his lips back from teeth the length of fingers. He's not being friendly, Wren. He's a little protective. Tobias left shortly after, walking with the particular gait of a man whose boot has been sat on by a predator, and did not stop waving until the bend in the road. Wren rounded on the wolf. That was a paying customer. I was a thief, thought Alaric, wallowing in triumph. He wanted your honey and your hands and your laugh, and he called you Wren like it was his to say. But that night, back in the palace, the triumph curdled, because Alaric caught his own reflection in the dark window, a man in a crown, and understood the ugly arithmetic. Tobias Fenn had courted her honestly, in daylight, as himself, and been sent away. Alaric Thorne had lied to her for a month with his whole body. Of the two of them, the wolf was not the honest one, and the next morning he ran out of time. Lady Maren of High Cairn had arrived early. She stood in his council hall like a drawn blade, tall and silver-braided, an alpha bred through 9 generations for exactly this room, flanked by Elder Corvan and half the council, and the words being said around her were dates and ceremonies and airs. Alaric heard perhaps 1/10 of them. It was Corvan who noticed. Old, careful Corvan, who had survived 3 kings by noticing things. There is a scent on you, Majesty, the elder said softly, after the hall had emptied to the 3 of them. Lavender. Every day for a month. We had you followed, of course. Everything in Alaric went glacier still. Then your follower saw a wolf and a beekeeper. He saw the crown lying in an unregistered Omega's dooryard like a hound. Corvan's voice stayed gentle, which was how you knew it was a threat. She is nothing, Majesty. No pack standing, no line, no name. The North will not kneel to a Luna who smells of smoke and trade honey. The girl is a problem. Problems on borders have accidents. He bowed and left, and the door closed with a sound like a lid. Maren remained. She studied Alaric for a long moment. This cold king she had been shipped across a mountain range to marry, and she saw what Corvan had seen, and named it more plainly. You love her, Maren said. Not a question. Alaric didn't answer, which was an answer. Maren turned to the window, and something moved behind her flawless face. My mother was an Omega, she said to the glass. Common born. High Cairn scrubbed her from the records when my father remarried. I learned her name from a laundress when I was 15. She was quiet a moment. I came here to be a queen, Thorne, and I will fight for that. Understand me. But I did not come here to help Corvan drown some beekeeper in a well and call it fate. She looked back at him, and for one breath she was not a rival at all, just a tired woman who had also grown up outside a closed door. He gave the order an hour ago. Rogues hired through 3 hands. Tonight. He thinks I don't listen at doors. Her mouth twisted. Everyone thinks Omega daughters don't listen at doors. Alaric was already moving. He went through the window. It was faster. He shifted mid-fall, hit the courtyard on 4 legs at a dead run, and the northern reach saw its king pass through the evening like a black comet, and far ahead, over the hills, he could smell it already. Smoke, burning beeswax, lavender. Wren was in the bee yard with a water bucket when they came. 3 of them, rough wolves in half-shift with torches, and one had already thrown fire onto the 3rd hive. And she was not running. That was the thing. She was standing between strange armed males and 11 boxes of bees with a bucket, screaming at them, because they were her employees, because they were her full house, because she had exactly one thing in the world, and it hummed. The largest rogue backhanded the bucket away and grabbed her by the throat. What happened next, Wren would remember for the rest of her life in pieces. A shape came over the garden fence without touching it. The rogue holding her simply ceased to be holding her, ceased to be standing, ceased. And the black wolf was there. Her wolf. Honey. And he was a different animal entirely. He was the reason old stories tell children to stay on the path. The second rogue swung a torch at him and connected, fire across the shoulder, and the wolf staggered, and the third came in from the blind side with a long knife, and Wren screamed his name, and the wolf did the only thing fast enough. He shifted. Between one heartbeat and the next, the burning wolf became a burning man, tall and scarred and terrible, who caught the knife hand out of the air and broke it, and put both remaining rogues down with an economy that was over before her scream finished. And then he stood in the light of her burning hive, smoke rising off his shoulder, and turned to face her. Wren knew that face. Everyone in the northern reach knew that face. It was on the coins. "You," she said. The word came out with no air in it. She looked at the coin face and the golden eyes, the exact same golden eyes, and her hand came up over her mouth. "Honey, Wren, you are the—" Her voice cracked into a register between laughing and shattering. I bathed the Alpha King in my wash tub. Wren, listen. I told the Alpha King to sleep in the shed. Her back hit the garden fence. She was shaking now, and the shaking was turning, rapidly, from shock into something with a much sharper edge. You slept in my bed, for weeks. I told you things. I told you things I have never said out loud to a living soul, and you were a person the entire time. You were a king the entire time. You let me cry into your fur about being nobody, and you sat there knowing. She grabbed the nearest object, which was the smoker, and threw it at his royal head. He let it hit him. "Say something." "The shawl was me," Alaric said. She stopped. "What?" "You looked for it for 2 days. It's in my bed, in the palace. It has been there for a month. I sleep with it. My beta thinks I've lost my mind, and he is correct." The words were coming now, all of it. A confession assembled over many guilty nights, and finally allowed to run. The rabbit was me. I spent an entire state dinner planning that rabbit. The stew you made was the finest thing I have eaten, and I have a French cook. The bath, I could have refused the bath. Kings refuse things. It is most of the job. I got in the tub because you pointed. My council thinks I've been on patrol. My hand swelled for a week because I attacked your hive, and when the royal healer asked, I said, and this is true, I stood in my own throne room and said, the hive made the first move. He took 1 step closer, burned, bleeding, entirely unarmored. And every word you said to the wolf, I kept. You taught Della to swim. Your feet get cold at night. 11 hives sound like a full house. Wren, you have never once, not for 1 hour since the night you stitched me, been nobody. You have been the entire kingdom. The rest of it is just land. The only sounds were the fire eating the 3rd hive, and the surviving bees, and her breathing. You lied to me, she said. Quietly, which was worse. Every day, I get to be angry about that. I don't care whose face is on the coins. I get to be angry. You do. Maybe for a long time. I'll wait. I'm very patient. A beat. That's a lie, too. I'm not patient at all. But I'll wait anyway. Wren looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the water bucket, walked past the Alpha King of the Northern Reach, and threw the water on his burning hive, because first things first. And when she turned around, eyes wet and jaw set, she said, "Well, don't just stand there bleeding, Your Majesty. Get the other bucket." The king got the other bucket. They put the fire out together, in the dark, in the smoke, side by side. It was not forgiveness, but it was the shape forgiveness would eventually take. What followed, the Northern Reach still talks about. The Alpha King returned to his capital at dawn with 2 bound rogues, a burned shoulder he refused to have treated by anyone but a village beekeeper, and evidence extracted from the rogues with very little effort of exactly whose silver had hired them. He walked into the full council in yesterday's smoke-stained clothes and set the coin purse on the table in front of Elder Corvin. "You told me problems on borders have accidents," Alaric said to the whole room in the voice he saved for wars. "Here is what I have learned about accidents, Corvin. They happen to males who send fire against my mate." The word landed on the council chamber like a dropped anvil. Mate. Corvin aged 10 years in his chair. I was stripped of his seat and his lands before the morning session ended. And the strangest part, the part the scribes argued about later, was that at the very end, the old elder looked up and said, without malice, "My father served your grandfather, boy. I only ever wanted the North to hold." And Alaric, who could have taken his head, gave him instead a cold cell and a long life to think in, because Wren had once told a wolf that she could work with hate. But indifference was the thing that killed. And Alaric had decided Corvin would spend his remaining years entirely, thoroughly forgotten. Lady Maren departed for High Cairn a week later with a treaty better than the marriage would have been, and a royal decree personally sealed, restoring one scrubbed name to the High Cairn records, an Omega's name, her mother's. She read the decree in her wagon, alone, twice, and if her eyes were red at the border crossing, her guards knew better than to notice. And on midsummer, before the assembled packs of the Northern Reach, 10,000 wolves on the great terraces of the capital, the Alpha King stood beside a small Omega in a plain blue dress who smelled of lavender and beeswax, and packs that had never once set her a place at their fires watched their king take her hand. "This is Wren Hollis," Alaric said, and his voice reached the last terrace. "A year ago she pulled a crossbow bolt out of a dying wolf and asked nothing. Your king has knelt in her kitchen. Your king has slept at her hearth. Your king has been, and I want the record to show this, bathed in her wash tub." A ripple of astonished laughter, 10,000 strong. "She is mine. I am hers. She is your Luna, and any wolf, high-born or low, who slights her, slights me, and I do not forgive slights. I recently melted down a crown to prove a point." He raised their joined hands. "Kneel." 10,000 wolves knelt. Somewhere in the 3rd terrace, In the Black Pine delegation, an aunt and a cousin named Della knelt too, faces the color of ash, and afterward Della wrote a letter that began with 11 crossed-out apologies. Wren read it in her new garden, twice, and set it in a drawer, and did not answer it that year. Maybe the next year. Maybe not. Some doors, once closed without slamming, stay on the latch a long while, and the girl who had waited at the post bag was done waiting on anyone. Besides, she was busy. The palace had gardens now that hummed. The epilogue is small, which is how you know it's true. Late summer, evening, the Royal South Garden, which had been dug up on the Luna's orders and replanted entirely in lavender, 40 beds of it, purple to the wall, with 11 white hives standing in a row like a full house. The Queen of the Northern Reach sat in the grass with her shoes off, a jar of dark honey beside her, going over the harvest ledger. Her crown was in the grass, too, upside down, because it made her scalp itch, and a fat golden bee was walking around the rim of it like it was inspecting the workmanship. Stretched out beside her, taking up an entire flower bed's worth of evening sun, lay a black wolf with his head in her lap. Kings from 3 neighboring nations had written letters about this habit. The letters had not been answered. A.B. lifted off the lavender. It wandered through the warm air, drunk on the season, and drifted down and landed directly on the black wolf's nose. The wolf's eyes opened, golden. The bee flexed its wings, 3 inches from teeth that had ended a rogue insurrection. Wren did not look up from her ledger. "Honey," she said. "Don't." The wolf held perfectly still. The bee sat on the nose of the Alpha King of the Northern Reach, cleaned its front legs, took its sweet time, and finally hummed away toward the hives. The wolf let out a long breath through his nose and settled his head deeper into her lap, and her fingers came down into his ruff, absent and sure, the way they had that first night on a kitchen floor. Progress, she thought. Truce, thought the king. For now. The hive knows what it did.